Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something I know you've been curious about, the NFL's early days. We're going way back, talking about those first teams and players. We're going depth, using material from NFL.com's NFL 100 section. Get ready for some stories, some real surprises that you probably won't find in your average sports documentary.
You know, it's fascinating to think about the difference in scale. Like, we're talking 1920, a world away from the NFL we know today.
Yeah, paint that picture for us.
Okay, so picture this. Just 14 teams. These were called the original towns, right? They formed the basis of what we know today, this global sporting giant.
14 teams. So we're talking a much smaller, way more regional league.
Exactly.
But they were still playing for a championship, and that's where we get to this really interesting story.
Oh, yeah.
The story of the Brunswick Bulky Colander Cup.
Okay.
This was the trophy back then, right?
Yeah.
Won by the Akron Pros. They had a perfect season.
Wow, perfect.
And then the trophy just vanished. Like poof, gone.
Gone without a trace. Really captures the imagination, doesn't it? This piece of history, maybe tucked away in an attic somewhere, just waiting to be rediscovered.
I know, right? Some even think it could be in an Akron attic.
Really?
Makes you wonder what other pieces of early NFL history are just sitting out there waiting for us to find them. Okay, but before we go on an attic diving adventure, let's talk about two teams, the Chicago Cardinals and the Decatur Staleys.
Oh, yeah.
They would later become the Chicago Bears, but their rivalry goes all the way back to the very beginning, 1920.
And get this, they're the only two original franchises still playing today. Think about that. Over a century of history, rivalries, fans who have been loyal for generations. It really shows you how powerful, how enduring this sport is.
It really does. Not every team had that kind of staying power, though. Take the Chicago Tigers, for example.
Yeah.
They played at Wrigley Field, which we all know, right? Iconic. But they were gone after only one season.
One season. That's wild. You know, that just shows how uncertain things were back then, how volatile the early league was. Teams were popping up, disappearing, moving all over the place. It wasn't the stable, huge business we know today. It was a real fight to survive back then.
Survival of the fittest. And speaking of survival, we have to talk about Canton, Ohio.
Oh, Kent.
I mean, it's the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but it's also where the NFL was born.
The birthplace.
And then you've got the Canton Bulldogs, right? They were a force, 25 wins in a row, a record that's never been broken.
25 in a row. That's just amazing. You know, their story shows how much these early teams shaped the game as we know it.
Totally. Okay, shifting gears for a second, let's talk about another legacy. The Nesser family. 6 brothers, all worked on the railroad and all played for the Columbus Panhandles.
A whole team of brothers.
I know, right? Plus, they gave us the first father-son duo in the NFL. Ted and Charlie Nesser.
Oh, wow. It's like football was a family affair.
It really was. And I think those stories show how much football was a part of everyday life back then. It was jobs, families, communities, all coming together on the field. It's hard to imagine that in today's NFL.
Right. It wasn't just a sport. It was woven into their lives.
Totally. Okay, now picture this. October 3rd, 1920, the first ever NFL game. The Dayton Triangles, they're hosting the Columbus Panhandles at Triangle Park, and guess what? They win 14-0.
A shutout. The very first game.
I know. And here's the really cool part. They still play NFL flag games at that same park today.
It's amazing, like history coming full circle. That park saw the start of a sport that would capture the world's attention. You have to wonder, did those fans back then have any idea what they were a part of? Did they sense they were watching something special, something that would last for generations?
That's a great question. I wondered the same thing. Okay, let's move on to another team with a really interesting story, the Decatur Staleys. We know them as the Chicago Bears now.
Right, the Bears.
Their journey is wild. So George Halas, he was playing pro baseball at the time. He joins the team, and he sees their potential. So what does he do? He moved them to Chicago. He takes ownership, and, well, the rest is history. What do you think? Would the NFL be totally different if he hadn't done that?
That's a great question. Halas had real vision, you know. He understood that a big market and a strong brand were important. And those are still at the heart of the NFL today. And think about this. His family still owns the Bears today. That's how big his impact was.
It's incredible to think about how one decision can shape an entire league. Okay, moving from legacies to innovation, the Detroit Heralds were real pioneers.
Oh, yeah.
They were the first to put numbers on jerseys.
Wow.
I know, and they actually promoted their players.
Interesting.
Those things seem so obvious now.
It shows how forward-thinking they were. They understood that getting fans involved was key. They were creating a spectacle, they were building personalities, the kind of things that make us love football today. They were ahead of their time.
Way ahead. And then there were the Hammond Pros, a team known for being incredibly inclusive. They had a good number of African-American players at a time when that was rare. What do you think made them so progressive?
That's a really interesting question. Was it the owner? The people who lived in Hammond? It makes you want to dig deeper, look into what society was like back then and how it affected the teams. But whatever the reasons, the Hammond Pros, they give us a glimpse at a different side of football, a more inclusive side.
Definitely. Not all the stories are happy ones, though. Take the Muncie Flyers.
Oh, yeah.
Sadly, they hold the record for never scoring a single point, and they played 2 whole games against other founding teams.
Oh, no. 2 games. I guess it shows just how tough the league was, even back then.
Yeah.
Not everyone could win it all. Some teams, like the Flyers, they just couldn't make it work.
True, but then you've got a team like the Rock Island Independents. They didn't last long in the league, but they produced 4 Hall of Famers, and their legacy lives on. The city even has a vintage football game every year to celebrate them.
4 Hall of Famers. That's amazing. It really shows how much these early teams became a part of their towns, even the ones that didn't win championships.
Totally. And lastly, let's talk about the Rochester Jeffersons.
The Jeffersons, okay.
They had a tough time getting local fans because they got players from outside their state. That's so different from how it works today.
It really shows you how much things have changed. Back then, it was all about supporting your local team. Now it's about getting the best talent from anywhere, appealing to fans all over the country. The Jeffersons, they really show us how the idea of what a home team is has changed over time.
Absolutely. It really highlights how the NFL went from these local teams to this national powerhouse. It's huge now, fans all over the world. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the legendary players, the guys who were on the field back then. We're talking Jim Thorpe, George Trafton, Patty Driscoll.
Oh, some big names.
Yeah, big names. All Hall of Famers. They helped shape the game in those early years. I can only imagine the athleticism, the grit it took to play back then. I mean, we're talking a whole different era of football. Leather helmets, hardly any padding. Those guys were tough. What do you think? Did the lack of protection change how the game was played compared to today?
Absolutely. It must have been so dangerous. You had to be incredibly tough, resilient, just to step onto the field. So yeah, I think it definitely created a different style of play, one that relied more on strategy, on finesse, to avoid those brutal hits. It's amazing how player safety and equipment have changed along with the game.
It really shows how much the game has evolved over the years. And these early stars, they weren't just athletes, right? A lot of them were regular people with everyday jobs. We talked about the Nesser brothers working on the railroad.
Right, just regular guys.
Such a contrast to today's players with those huge contracts and all the fame.
Yeah, it really shows the blue-collar roots of the NFL. These guys were playing because they loved the game. They were balancing their passion with their everyday lives. It makes what they did even more impressive. They weren't in it for the money or fame. They were pioneers. They were building something special.
They were building the foundation. It makes their stories so much more human, And it's fascinating to see how each city back then added to the NFL's identity. You've got industrial cities like Canton and Muncie, big cities like Chicago and Detroit, and smaller towns like Rock Island and Decatur, all woven into early NFL history.
It's like a snapshot of America in the 1920s, a country changing, moving forward, and football was right there with it. Reflecting those changes, capturing the spirit of the times. It's more than just a game, it's a reflection of American culture.
It makes you realize how connected the NFL is to the history of this country. And it's wild to think that these small towns, these brand new teams, were the seeds of what would become this global phenomenon.
It really is. It speaks to the power of passion, of innovation, the competitive spirit. Those early pioneers, they took a chance on a new sport. And because of their dedication, they helped create something that millions of people around the world love.
Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about some of the challenges these early teams faced. We talked about the financial instability, how physical the game was. But what about the logistics? Travel, for example. It must have been a nightmare compared to today's chartered flights and fancy hotels.
Oh, I can only imagine. We're talking long train trips, uncomfortable conditions, all just to get to the game. And remember, this was before radio or TV were everywhere, so building a fan base really depended on local newspapers and word of mouth.
It makes you really appreciate those early fans, you know?
Yeah.
It wasn't easy to be a fan back then. It wasn't like just turning on the TV or checking social media. They had to work to find information, make an effort to support their team.
It really highlights the importance of the community, that grassroots support. Teams needed those local fans to survive, and those fans played a huge part in the NFL's growth and success.
It was a real partnership. Now, we can't ignore the social context of the time, right? Football was seen as this rough, manly sport, and women were pretty much excluded. What impact do you think those societal norms had on the early NFL?
That's a tough one. You know, we celebrate the progress we've made with inclusivity, but we also have to admit that the early NFL reflected the society of its time. It wasn't perfect. There were barriers for women, for other groups. It reminds us that while we celebrate the history, we also have to acknowledge its problems and keep working towards a future for the sport that's more inclusive.
It makes you wonder if they had any idea, that they were part of something that would become this global, huge thing.
Yeah, amazing to think about.
And speaking of new things, we talked about how the Detroit Heralds were innovative, like with promoting players and using jersey numbers. How else were teams connecting with fans back then?
Well, you have to remember, back then, sports writers and journalists, they were super important. They shaped how people saw the game. They were the storytellers, capturing the drama, making it come alive for people who couldn't be at the games. Those vivid descriptions, the colorful stories, they helped make players into legends and turn rivalries into these epic battles.
They were like the original influencers.
Exactly.
And then in the late 20s, early 30s, you have radio broadcasts starting up. That must have been huge for the NFL.
Oh, it was a game changer. Radio brought the sounds, the excitement right into people's homes. It created a shared experience for everyone, no matter where they lived. That was a big step in making the NFL more than just a regional thing and turning it into a national phenomenon.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into the NFL's early days, we've seen how a small group of teams, driven by passion and innovation, built the foundation for one of the most successful sports leagues ever. They faced tough times, they adapted, they came up with new ideas, and in the end, they created something truly special.
It really is a testament to what sports can do. It brings us together, it inspires us, it reminds us about the importance of hard work and teamwork. And in their story, it keeps going with each new season, each new generation of players and fans.
It's been incredible exploring this hidden history of the NFL. From those early games in Canton, Ohio, to the huge stadiums we have today, we've seen how much the league has changed, but also stayed true to its roots. And as we finish up, I think it's important to remember that even the biggest accomplishments, they start small. They start with an idea, with a willingness to try something new.
And as you keep learning about the NFL's amazing history, keep asking questions, keep digging, keep searching for those hidden stories that show us the real heart of the game. Because behind every touchdown, every amazing play, every championship, there's a story waiting to be told, a story of passion, of dedication, of that constant chase for gridiron glory.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the NFL's beginnings. Until next time, keep exploring, keep diving deep.